Welcome to Ceratec's Analysis Automation using Femap API webinar. My name is Sarah Utsugi and I'm your host today. This webinar is a part of a series we're presenting this year, focusing on ways companies can improve their engineering and product development process. Today, our speakers are Pedro Chu and Allison Rederson-Lear. Pedro Chu is the Director of Advanced Engineering Team at Ceratec with over 30 years of experience using simulation technologies to optimize structural performance of mechanical components and systems. During his career, he has done work for the nanotechnology industry, medical devices, automotive, consumer products, nuclear, heavy machinery, aerospace, space, and others. Before joining Ceratec, Pedro worked at MSC Software, John Deere, Atomic Energy of Canada, and Brazilian Space Program. Pedro holds a degree in naval engineering from Escola Politécnica da Universidade de São Paulo, Brazil. He is married, has 3 daughters, and recently became a grandfather. Allison Rederson-Lear is an engineer at Ceratec. She has been with Ceratec for 5 years and has been using programming to automate CAD and FEA programs for 4 years. She graduated from the University of California, Irvine in 2015 with a Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering and a specialization in aerospace. Now I'll pass the presentation over to Pedro and Allison.
Thanks, Sarah. And your pronunciation of my school was actually excellent.
Thank you.
So, thank you for attending this webinar on analysis automation. And today, what we'll do is we are going to discuss a little bit about some challenges as analysts will face when doing a stress analysis. We'll see how automation can help ease some of those challenges. And the automation tool that we're talking about is Femap API. And with a Femap API, you are not limited only to the Femap environment. You will see that it goes beyond that, and that you can actually use it to integrate with other engineering applications that you use. We'll look at some success stories, how Saratech has helped customers over the years to streamline the analysis process, to capture best practices, and basically how you can make into a successful implementation. And then if you think that the API is something that you want to investigate more, we'll let you know how you can get your feet wet and start looking into API. So I have been in this finite element simulation arena for over 30 years. And I have seen many things, in this industry. If you give the same model to 5 different analysts, chances are you're going to get 5 different results. And why is that? First of all, when you receive a CAD model, even though you have told the design engineer to get rid of many features, chances are there is still work to be done on your part. And you as an analyst, you need to go and make decisions, what is important, what is not important, and how to defeature your CAD geometry. Once that is done, you still need to go and create a mesh and see where you need a finer mesh, where you need a coarser mesh, how you are going to connect the different parts together, how you are going to apply the loading, how you're going to constrain your model. And different analysts will have different approaches to how each of these steps should be done. Another area that is quite often overlooked is materials. When you're doing finite element simulation, materials is probably one of the most important input that you need to give to the solver, provide to the solver. And how many times have I seen in the consulting projects that I go to customers and they have no clue what the material properties to use for their designs. And I have to go and do a Google search and go to new handbooks and to find the correct properties. Recently, we were doing a scissor lift project, and this scissor lift had several components that are tied together. And how are they connected? You basically have to connect one component to the other component and the direction in which the load path has to go through it. So that's a lot. Many times when you're putting a motor together, it involves doing the same type of connection over and over. So that, those are very repetitive operations, and they lead to a lot of errors, human errors. Okay. But let's say that you have overcome all of these and you have gotten some results. So what do you do with the result? Many people may think that the finite element analysis is all about some pretty pictures, but it is not. What we want is to make sure that my design is sound, that I have positive margins of safety. And so how do you calculate the margins of safety? Do you use von Mises stresses? Do you use principal stresses? Do you use nodal stresses? Do you use average stresses or non-average stresses? And each company will have its own process, own procedures to curve results, and then using those results to calculate the margins of safety. So after everything's done, I have good results. And then comes the last stage, which is creating a report. To some people, report is they dredge having to write a report, but it's a very important part of the analysis process. Next slide, thanks. So, what if you had an automation tool that could guide you through every step of the analysis? Something that could automatically or tell you how to defeature your CAD model, how to apply loads, how to mesh your model, how to or give you access to a material library that has been approved by your company, instead of you having to go out and search for all those material properties. Okay, if you had, and these two could also help you interrogate the results and automatically calculate all the margins of safety for you. Wouldn't that give your engineers more time to look, hey, I have an area of high stresses. How can I optimize my component, my structure? That would free you, give you a lot more time to think, more on the engineering side rather than just manipulating an analysis tool. Next slide. So this tool that we're talking about is the Femap API. It's API standing for Application Program Interface. And the API basically gives you access to all the capabilities in Femap. It's operation or a set of operations that you can do in Femap. You can automate it. Okay. And with the API, you can you are not limited only to the Femap environment. That opens the door to integration with all other engineering tools. Slide. So it will give you access to, for example, one of the most widely used engineering tools, in my opinion, which is a spreadsheet or Excel. Okay, you can import, you can export. If you have a complex system, that vehicle that you're working with, chances are somebody else is going to create the loads for you, and then now you have to bring those loads into Femap. How do you bring those loads? You can use, if it is something that you do it only once, it may not be worthwhile creating an API, but if it is something that you do over and over, use an API to go and access that information in Excel, and then automatically create all the loads and boundary conditions for you in your Femap model. API allows you to, as I mentioned before, calculate all the margin of safety and even write a report to you. It can be used to interface with other analysis tools such as MATLAB, AMSIM. And if you have a large model that will take several hours to run, and you don't have enough licenses, why tie up the licenses during the day when you can do it overnight? So API can also interface with a job scheduler that you can that you may use in your organization. Okay, so what we have seen here is that API is a very powerful tool. We have used in our organization. We have helped our customers to implement in their organizations, and Alison is going to share some of these success stories with you.
Yep, thanks, Pedro. So the first success story I want to talk about is this analysis summary sentence generator. And it might sound a little bit silly to just generate one sentence at a time, but in this case, I had a pretty large assembly, maybe 100 or 150 parts. And for my analysis report, I needed for each part, this sentence, this part number has a maximum stress of this, in this particular output set, at this element ID, and this is its temperature. And so I did this a couple of times, clicking through in the Femap interface, and that got really old really fast. So I just wrote a really short program to help me to do that. And that pretty much took, 5 minutes of clicking around in Femap and turned it into just a quick copy and paste from the Femap message window. So overall, this saved me a lot of time throughout developing this analysis report. Next up is importing material properties from Excel. So in a variety of projects we've come across, the customer has their material properties in Excel. Someone went into some materials documentation like MMPDS and pulled it out into a spreadsheet. And now they want to get it into Femap so their analysts can use it. So what you can do with API is have the API import all your material properties from Excel and create a Femap material library, and pair that with a startup script that makes sure that that material library is loaded whenever you start up Femap. So this kind of puts all the work up front, and now the analysts themselves don't have to dig around in MMPDS or dig around in different spreadsheets. All the material properties are right there in Femap for them to use. Next up is point load distribution. So in this case, the customer's best practice was to distribute point loads over an area rather than just creating a load on a single node. So this API would allow the analyst to select the central node and create a distributed load around that central node. And this saved a fair bit of time for the engineers, but it also reduced human error a lot. With engineers making a mistake and maybe they forget to make that distributed load, and now you have a point load with all these unrealistic stresses. So this made things a lot easier for them. Next up is this combined loads analysis. So like Pedro was saying, you might need to combine different sources of stresses in your model. For this case, we had a whole bunch of transient thermal stresses. We also had random vibration stresses and that kind of thing. And so this customer had this enormous spreadsheet that they were using to calculate their margins of safety based on the combinations of these stresses. In their original process, the engineer would need to go through and look at each of those thermal transient time steps to determine which time steps they wanted to look at in their giant Excel document. So out of maybe 200 time steps, the analyst would pick 5. And that relied a lot on the ability of the human engineer to determine what the critical time steps were going to be. But by automating this process, we were able to do away with the spreadsheet entirely so that engineers could create contour plots, of the margin of safety in Femap, as well as determine what the critical thermal output set was, which means that they could look at all of the thermal cases instead of just 5 or 6 out of a couple hundred. So overall, this saved our engineers about 8 hours of time. And this was huge because we did this several times. The customer had sort of an iterative process going on. So this wasn't just, it saved one engineer 8 hours of time. It saved 4 engineers each 8 hours of time for each iteration of this project. So this ended up being a huge time saver for the engineers that were working on this project. Next up are a couple of Saratech success stories. First off is DuraPost, and DuraPost is a fatigue analysis add-on to Femap. It's built using the Femap API, and it allows users to assess your fatigue results directly in Femap. Unlike some of the previous examples, this is just a general purpose product. So you might have an API that's very specific to your processes, or you might have a more general API that applies to a broader audience. So the goal of DuraPost is to save your users time and get you that return on investment in a very short time. Similarly, AeroPost is a Femap add-on that manages aeroelastic loads from Nastran. Again, this one is focused on saving time and getting you that ROI as soon as possible. So if you're interested in getting started with API, obviously we're doing this webinar, so we can help you out there. We also offer API training for Femap, but there are also plenty of self-guided resources online that you can find. We have done a couple of tips and tricks and customer enablement sessions on our YouTube channel that you might be interested in, but there's also the Siemens community site, which is a forum where people can post their own Femap APIs or ask for help when working on their own Femap APIs. As you're diving into this, here are a couple of best practices that I really recommend focusing on. The first one is consider your end users. So you might be developing a program and think to yourself, well, what idiot is going to put in this bogus input? Well, some idiot probably is. So you need to think about, do your users know what to do when they're looking at your program? What happens if they make a mistake? Is your program very forgiving or is it very unforgiving? Definitely you want to consider that and give your users plenty of feedback as they're using your program as to whether they're using it correctly. Second is add descriptive comments throughout your code. If you're not familiar with comments in code, comments are just text that go into code that are ignored by the computer. So these comments are entirely for you or anyone else who's going to be reading your code. So that means anyone else who's looking at this, or you several years from now might be needing to look back at this. These descriptive comments are really going to help you or anyone else figure out what's going on and how to change what they need to change. Next up is create documentation. And this can be something for your end users, like I already mentioned, or this can be something for other people who want to come in and modify your code. Sometimes your code might have some specific limitations that people need to watch out for, whether they're programmers or users. So you definitely want to keep track of that. Next up is maintaining version control. So just like with your CAD parts, you don't want different people modifying different codes, and now you've ended up with 6 different versions that do 6 different things, and you're kind of lost in there. So do maintain version control across your programs. And finally, test. Obviously, you can't test every single scenario that could happen, but you do want to work with people who are going to be using your program, and you want to be using your program in realistic scenarios to determine what users might trip over, what your program might trip over, etc. Now I'm going to pass it over to Andy to talk a little bit about Saratech.
Thanks, Allison and Pedro. So as you can see, there are tons of things that you can do with API, and this is just a very small portion of the capabilities of the program and what we can do to help. Hopefully you are finding this useful. But as an engineering company, Ceratec is really focused on helping our customers realize better products through better product development experiences. So what does that mean? That means that we are here to help you optimize, eliminate redundancy, create better processes. So if you need help solving engineering problems, reach out to us, whether it's analysis, design, data management, or process improvement. Our team is ready and able to assist. So we work with companies in all major industries, from aerospace to marine and energy. We do small projects to major implementations. We help many companies realize better products by improving their product development experiences. And again, we're here to help. So I'm glad that you all are able to join us today.
All right, thank you, Pedro, Allison, and Andy. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and enter them in the questions panel now, and we'll get to all of those. It does look like we have a few questions already, so let's start getting into those questions. The first one comes from Kenneth. It says, do I have to be an analyst or Femap expert to create APIs?
I can answer that one. So no, you don't. Obviously, it's going to help. But if you can work closely with your users and really understand their process and their needs, then you can develop your own APIs.
Great. Looks like we have one more question coming from Parker. It said, what is a typical analysis automation implementation process?
I can take the question. Obviously, the first thing is that we need to understand what you want to automate. I think typically we would go, have a meeting, have you show us what you want to do, what you want to achieve. Once we know that, then we put a proposal together for you. And in the whole process, we are working together with your team. So we will establish, depending on how big the project is, maybe some milestones, so we don't just give you the entire API in the end for you to see if it works or not. We would develop a part of it. You go and test. You will have test cases, and then if that works, then we implement the next step and so forth until everything is done according to what you need. But the key there is that we need to understand the process that you want to automate, what you want to do, and then we'll be working very closely with you for the implementation.
Great. It looks like that's all the questions we have for today. So thank you for all of your questions. As a reminder, if you have any additional questions or comments after the webinar, you can always email us at info@ceratec.com. Please make sure you subscribe to our channel, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn to be notified of future events and to gain access to our webinar recordings and training videos. Thank you, Pedro, Allison, and Andy, and thank you all so much for attending, and have a great day.
Thanks for checking out our channel. If you like what you saw, make sure to like and subscribe down below so you don't miss out on any new videos. Follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter for the latest engineering news and information. And to see all of our upcoming events, please visit our website at ceratec.com/events.